根据三藩市警察局公布的数据，与2020年相比，2021年市内针对亚裔的仇恨犯罪案件从1年前的10宗上升到60宗，2022年截止到目前为止只有6宗。
We have to send a clear message that we won't tolerate it. We won't let people get away with it. I think that's a big deal, and that's going to have a huge impact.
从泰国老爷爷在街上被推倒致死，到60多岁的华裔老妇被4位青少年拳打脚踢，三藩市成为反亚裔仇恨犯罪发生最频繁的城市之一。市政府到底对这个现象有没有引起重视？华裔的人身以及财产安全问题又该如何解决？大家好，欢迎收看《仇恨边缘》，我是主持人张欣毅。今天我们来到三藩市市政厅，与市长布里德一起来聊一聊这座城市的仇恨犯罪。Hi, Mayor Bree.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this show.
Of course.
As we know, you born and grew up in San Francisco, so
Yes.
this is your hometown. How have you seen the city changed over the decades?
Well, it's changed a lot. It's so interesting because I spend a lot of time walking around the city, and in those spots, like there's new housing or there's new parks or there's renovated parks, and there's also different people. It's always great to run into somebody that I grew up with, but that doesn't happen very often. So the city has definitely changed in terms of its growth and development, and certain buildings have been torn down and other things have taken their place. But ultimately, it's still a really beautiful city, and feels really good to be here.
Yeah. So, what are your priorities right now?
Well, my biggest priority right now is to do two things. Number one, address public safety, because there have been so many incidents of violence. We all know, sadly, particularly targeted at the API community.
Yeah.
There's also gun violence, unfortunately, that continues to persist, and some of the various burglaries and other things. And so challenges with an issue of safety in this city are important, and we have to address them. So I'm really proud of a lot of the things that we're trying to do to get ourselves on track, and we're seeing the numbers change. The other thing, of course, is building more housing, because I grew up here. Most of the people I grew up with, they can't afford to live here anymore. And so the need to build more housing has a lot to do with not just what we need now for people who struggle with homelessness and people who struggle with affordability, but it's also what we need for future generations. What happens to the next generation of San Franciscans who want to live in the city that they were born and raised in? And we have to do a lot better in building more housing.
So, could you share with us a little bit more details about what did San Francisco experience in hate crimes, specifically targeting Asian communities?
Well, let me just say that fortunately, because of the great work of the San Francisco Police Department and community, we've made a number of arrests, which as a result, we've seen the numbers go down considerably. But during its height, we saw a surge, and mostly elderly, members of the Asian community who are mostly elderly were targeted. And it was definitely heartbreaking and devastating. Some even lost their lives. And what I appreciate the most about this is how the community came together. And what we saw was something that was pretty remarkable. We saw communities from all over the city of other races who really supported the API community, and in fact, the Street Violence Intervention Program, which is mostly consists of African American men who help deal with challenges around violence in San Francisco, they decided, in addition to the work they do, they would patrol Chinatown and support the community. And that was a really great testament to bridge building in communities and to show support and solidarity. And we made significant investments in our ambassador programs to ensure that there are eyes and ears on the streets. Our escort program, so the program that specifically provides any senior in our city a chance to call self-help for the elderly to ask for an escort, whether it's on bus or a ride, but to make sure that when someone wants to run their errands, that they're not alone if they feel afraid. And we put more resources into cameras, into officers, into ambassadors, into things that make sure that we're able to combat this and so that people don't believe they can get away with it. And I think right now we have a number of those cases pending, and my hope is that our district attorney, Brooke Jenkins, prosecutes those cases and those people are held accountable for their crimes.
We all know minorities have been treated unfairly for a long time in American history. So why do you think we're seeing a surge of hate crime that targeting Asian communities this 2 or 3 years?
I think what's interesting is, sadly during the beginning of the pandemic, because of the conversations that happened on the national level from the former president, because of where it is believed that COVID-19 originated, there was a lot of divisive language there. And I think a lot of it, really stemmed from, the language of some of our leaders here in the United States. And it was very sad and unfortunate and very divisive. And what we tried to do here in San Francisco is really focus on unity. How do we come together? How do we work together? How do we show support and solidarity for one another and condemn those acts of violence as they occur and make that unacceptable and not the norm? And so, a lot of the work that we did together, because it was really, it wasn't just people who were being attacked, it was businesses that were being vandalized. And so we did have to work together and put together some financial resources from the city to support those small businesses, to help with these various programs to ensure safety of our mostly Asian seniors who were typically the targets. And that took a lot of work to get to where we are, but the community really came together. CYC, Community Youth Center, they've been invaluable in this process because they have so many young people that work with their organization. Those young people were very much involved in helping to support the elderly Asian population in this process. So really the community wrapped its arms around many of these Asian seniors who may not have had family to support and help them. It was really, I think, a thing that brought us together, but unfortunately a tragic situation that impacted people's families and people's lives.
好，让我们先休息一下，广告之后马上回来。欢迎回到仇恨边缘，让我们继续和市长布里德一起来聊一聊三藩市的反亚裔仇恨犯罪。Since we talk about anti-Asian hate crimes, so there's a lot of hate crimes targeting Asian peoples in San Francisco. For example, the Thai grandpa pushed to death, and also our former Commissioner Greg Chu got unprovoked attack on the street, and also a Chinese grandma, Mrs. Ren, got beaten up by 4 juveniles in her own apartment.
Yes.
As mayor of San Francisco, what have you done or will do to help the community heal from this ongoing issue?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, because we're able to make the arrest in many of these cases, our goal is to make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable. So that's a big deal. And as a result of getting some of these people off the streets, we have seen a reduction in the number of hate crimes towards the Asian community because I think of the work that we're doing, and especially the work that our district attorney, Brooke Jenkins, is doing to hold perpetrators accountable, to not allow bail, to not let some of these violent offenders back out on our streets, because we have to send a clear message that we won't tolerate it. We won't let people get away with it. I think that's a big deal, and that's going to have a huge impact. But some of the other things we've done, as I mentioned earlier, are investments in community-based organizations that serve this population, making sure that there are eyes and ears on the streets with our various ambassadors. We work with Street Violence Intervention Program and Community Youth Center. Like, they have been just the most invaluable organization to not just support Chinatown, but to support neighborhoods where we know there's a larger Asian population, in particular Clement Street and also Visitation Valley. There's a huge senior population there. So having a lot of our community-based organizations become embedded into the programming and the things that occur for these various communities is instrumental, because then you have, relationships of trust that can be built, but also the goal is to keep the community safe when they know that there are others that are a part of the community that are there to defend and support the community. That makes a world of difference. And we've seen changes in neighborhoods. We've seen, from my perspective in talking to some of our seniors, they are grateful. They're grateful that someone cares, and they're grateful to have a lot of the young people around, and the young people of different races who are defending and supporting them. So I think that we're headed in a good direction. It's not to say that, things may not occur in the future, but for the most part, with a lot of the various people and organizations that we're working with, including those who are not necessarily getting paid, who are taking their own time to be a part of the solution, I think it's made a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. We had a conversation with the DA, Brooke Jenkins, and also according to the data, we know hate crimes is very underreported.
Yeah.
So especially for Asian community, when they experience the hate crime, let's say somebody called them racial slur on the street, they tend to just keep silence. They don't want to call the police. So could you tell us why it is important to report hate crime?
Well, I think what I've heard from a number of people, which has been a real challenge, is especially those who may not be able to speak English, they get frustrated sometimes because of the lack of support around interpretation. Like, we have to make it easier to have interpreters available, because more than likely people are going to feel more comfortable having the conversation. And then I think we also need to make sure that law enforcement is out there, and our recruitment efforts have been challenging. We have a number of officers who speak Mandarin and Cantonese, but not a lot. And part of the need for officers that are bilingual for various languages, because there are so many languages that San Franciscans speak, it's important that we recruit and retain those officers, and that those officers are able to work in these communities where we know that the population has, and in the case of San Francisco, a lot of our seniors speak Cantonese. And then the new generation, a lot of the young people speak Mandarin. So it's, very challenging to try and recruit officers who can communicate, but we also have a program where when people report crimes, we're able to take that information in a particular language. Like, we set up a whole system for that. And I think what we have to do a better job of as a city is getting out there and talking to the community about it, making sure that they are aware of what exists. But again, it goes back to being comfortable with communicating in one's language. And so we got a lot of outreach work to do, and that's why we work with organizations like Chinatown Community Development, we work with CYC, we work with Self-Help for the Elderly, because they are our connection. And even the Chinese Chamber, they are who we depend on to help us communicate the messaging around supporting and keeping the community safe. And not to mention SF Safe has been really an invaluable program that has really built bridges with the community. And so we are trying everything we can, reaching out to merchants, having conversations with merchants, having conversations at various community-based organizations to try and, hopefully entice people to report and to communicate. And it's just continues to be a challenge, but we're gonna keep trying.
Yeah, that's very helpful. 好，让我们休息片刻，广告之后马上回来。欢迎回到仇恨边缘，让我们继续和三藩市市长布里德一起来聊一聊，我们要如何做才可以停止仇恨犯罪。So, Mayor Breed, in your opinion, what do you think? How can we do to stop hate crime from happening in the first place?
Well, it's a complex issue, right? Because I think, what's interesting, I grew up in San Francisco, as you know, and we went to school with all different races of people, mostly Vietnamese and Chinese and Filipino and Black and some white. And what I really appreciated about my education in public schools in San Francisco is we had assemblies to celebrate Lunar New Year or to celebrate Black History Month and part of that celebration was to participate too in learning about one another's culture. And so those friendships, those relationships that develop as a result of going to school together and also being exposed to one another's culture, it develops not only a deep understanding and appreciation for someone else's culture, but the friendships that I have now are invaluable. We're all adults and we're still, in contact with one another. We're watching each other's kids grow. We're friends and of different races, and we all grew up in schools in San Francisco. And I think that part of what's important is that at an early age, we make sure that kids are learning about one another's culture, learning about, not only our differences, but how similar they are. Our love for family and, education and our support for our grandmothers, our seniors, and having conversations in the context of making sure that the community as a whole and people who would inflict harm on other people, see other people the same way you would see your own family member. So there's a lot of work we need to do there. And what I appreciate about a number of organizations that we've worked with is, especially during APA Heritage Month and the work that the foundation does, APA Heritage Foundation, they really work hard during that time to talk about this relationship, to talk about, how much in common we have and how we can continue to, maintain and grow understanding and deep respect for one another. And in fact, the Bruce Lee exhibit was a perfect example of, everybody thinks, okay, Bruce Lee the fighter, but Bruce Lee was a bridge builder. He taught African Americans, martial arts, and when he was threatened, even by his home community, to not do that, he, went into battle for it and continued to do it. And, there's this deep love for Bruce Lee in the Black community, not because he was a great fighter, but because he was really a bridge builder. And I think we have to be more deliberate about trying to make those connections with various communities, and that's going to take some work. So I'm really excited about what I know we're going to be doing in San Francisco to do just that. So I think we'll get there. I'm very optimistic about the future, and my hope is that we'll continue to support one another. If there's an attack on one of us, there's an attack on all of us, and we have to continue to come together to defend one another.
Well put. Like you said, diversity is the key. Understanding each other's culture is helpful to stop the hate.
Yeah.
So what do you see in the future of hate crime in San Francisco?
Well, my hope is that I won't see it ever again. My hope is that we're doing enough to deal with the issues around accountability, but we also need to make sure that it never happens in the first place. And I do think that a lot of the advocacy a lot of the nonprofit organizations, a lot of people who have come together has really kind of pushed back against it. And you know, my goal is to make sure it doesn't happen in the city, and I think a lot of the work we've done has been instrumental in helping us get to a better place.
Yeah. Could you tell us how can the Asian community work with you together to address this AEPI hate crimes?
Well, I gotta say, I have been working very closely with a number of organizations and individual leaders of the Asian community to help address this. And the relationship I think that we build and all the things that we've done together in terms of the ambassadors and communities, the various escort programs, the resources that the city provides, but also the organizations who have implemented, you know, the necessary work on the ground to serve and protect the community has been invaluable. If others want to get involved in any way, I think working with Community Youth Center, working with Chinatown Community Development, working with the Chinese Chamber, and then there's also various buildings where many of our seniors are housed. And in fact, you know, some of the leaders of those housing developments have really been instrumental in supporting and educating the community about, you know, safety, right? So I think there are so many different great organizations that we fund that have been leaders in this effort, and if anyone's interested in working with them or in some capacity, I think that would make a world of difference.
Yeah, this is very meaningful and a very helpful conversation. Thank you, Mayor Bree.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
好，今天的节目就告一段落。仇恨边缘是一档聚焦反亚裔仇恨犯罪的访谈节目。我们今后还会请到更多的政界人士以及社区领袖一起来探讨仇恨犯罪。我们也希望这个节目被更多需要了解和需要帮助的人看到。让我们一起共同努力，把周围变成一个充满爱而不是恨的地方。我是主持人张歆艺，我们下期节目见。正在收看节目的你，如果有任何问题想要问我们的来宾，欢迎在评论区留言，我们会仔细查看每一条评论，并联系该嘉宾帮忙解答。让我们共同努力，为停止仇恨犯罪贡献一份力量。